So, for the next 4 or so Sundays, we are thinking about community. So, I want to start with a little story. This is a story about a village in China. I don't know exactly where in China. But I found this story in a magazine, a Christian magazine, and I actually don't know the name of this man who shared this story, the magazine, but this is his story of his village. So around 20 years ago, I'm going to speak as if I am the man telling this story. So about 20 years ago, my hometown was known widely in the area as the village of thieves. Only a handful of families in that village refrained from engaging in crime, from stealing. The authorities, the police, did what they could. Many in the village would get caught. They'd maybe get arrested, maybe put in prison for a short period of time, then get released, and then they'd carry on going back to stealing again. I left this village for university, and 10 years passed until one day, during a phone call with my mum in 2002, she spoke of a stunning transformation that had taken place. It was no longer called a village of thieves. The theft, the crime had disappeared. The strange and simple reason behind this unexpected change. One by one, most of the villagers had come to know Jesus. On that phone call, I was dumbfounded. Who was this Jesus? How in the world did he have the power to change my hometown? A bit later on that year, I returned home for Chinese New Year, and I visited the local church in the village with my mum. All 8 rooms in that church building were packed with people. Their faces were shining with happiness and peace. Everything about the place, that church, stood out from the dreary desolation of the outside world. These Christians in that place, they prayed together, they worshipped, they made music, they preached with real joy. I knew this was a place where people's hearts were being set free. Not long after, while I was still staying in the village, I heard about an older woman who'd been hit by a car and fractured her leg. When some of the other women in the church in that village heard what had happened, they took turns visiting and caring for her. And this kind of thing was happening throughout the community. If someone was sick, he or she always had visitors. Whenever a family was in trouble, those around them did what they could to help. Those who could help in practical ways, they did that. Those who were unable to help practically, they prayed on the family's behalf. Everyone would face the crisis together. And as I watched, I saw that power, that same power work in my own family. My aunt told me, people can't just change other people. But the change I saw in your mother's life ended up changing me. When I saw the testimony of her life, I had to learn more about her faith, and now I'm a follower of Jesus too. My mother used to be a quick-tempered person. Every day there were arguments in my home. Until she began following the Lord, when all of that changed, she became respectful, amiable, forgiving, humble. She was wonderful to be around. And then after my foul-mouthed sister came to the Lord, she changed too. She began to speak differently. She became kind, gentle, gracious. Her words were now a blessing to other people. Even the fearsome Miss Chang from the vegetable market changed. Everyone now talked of how honestly she did business, how kind she was, and how generously she dealt with customers. 10 years before, I'd left a village corrupted by crime, and I had returned to see it transformed by Jesus. The love of God is and can be contagious. It can pass from one person to another through many simple, often mundane acts of care and service, and through the power of prayer. And in this beautiful story that I've just read of God's grace, his redemptive power, his love could move through that village like a high voltage electric current with brilliant effect, because those villagers lived in close proximity with each other. And as one by one they came to know Jesus, they started to share that love with each other. They did business together. They shopped together. They went to school together. They lived next door to each other. And so the love of Jesus spread. These are the kind of stories, I don't know whether, if you ever read the New Testament of the Bible, I'd encourage you to do that if you haven't done that yet. But if you ever read the New Testament, stories of Jesus' time, but stories of the early church, you hear these kind of things where whole communities, whole villages, whole towns come to know Jesus. And these wonderful stories of community transformation are still happening in many nations of the world today. However, I don't know about you, but I'm not from a community quite like that. I don't know if anyone in the room has been part of a village or a town or a city or even a other community that has a story quite like that. And I do think that in our society we do have a bit of a problem. In fact, we probably have quite a lot of various problems. But one of them does seem to me a failure of community. And it's quite an issue, particularly at the moment. If you follow the news, you will have seen in the space of a couple of weeks, violence on the streets, both in Belfast last week, in Southampton the week before, violence around immigration, around race, around the problems in kind of people having a sense of community together. And then there's long-term concerns also in our nation about loneliness and the impact of that on both people's physical and their mental health and well-being. Now, various reasons have been given for why so many people sadly seem to be lonely in our nation. However, I'd suggest that a significant factor in that is the weakening of bonds between people in their local communities. And the fact that as a nation, we've probably uncritically bought into a philosophy of radical individualism. Me over we. And the church hasn't been unaffected by that either. But yet this is at complete odds. Radical individualism is at complete odds with Jesus' vision for human flourishing and for his kingdom, which is one marked by self-sacrificial love. And also radical individualism flies in the face of all we now know scientifically about what we as human beings need to grow and function and flourish. And this dark underbelly, I think, of radical individualism is loneliness. I was reading something recently, an article, I think it was in The Guardian, and it's really quite startling, actually, that for many, many years, those in the kind of over 70s age bracket have tended to be the loneliest people, which is incredibly sad. And probably it makes sense, unfortunately. You know, when you're in older age, you lose a lot of people. People die, they get sick. Maybe you're housebound. Your kind of world narrows and retreats. And that's awful. But what this article was saying is that actually, rather concerningly, it's now 19 to 29-year-olds in the UK who are the group most likely to feel loneliness. 33% of that group describe being lonely a lot of the time. That compares with 70% of the over 70s. In this article, various possible reasons were given for this relatively new phenomenon of loneliness in young adults. Factors such as home working, so people aren't going out to work in offices and connecting with people face to face. This concept of scattering, where people are now much more likely to move across the country, so they maybe lose that sense of close community. Many young adults are living in house shares, maybe with people they don't even know. People are not getting married till much later on. The average age is now about 31 in the UK. And Professor Wiesbold, who was one of a number of experts that were written about in this article, he's a professor of education at Harvard University. He says that in wealthier countries, including the UK, there's been a fragmenting of civil society with less and less people belonging to civic institutions such as churches or trade unions or things like that. He also talks about a compare and despair online world fueled by social media, which amplifies existing feelings of loneliness. People look at other people's beautiful, created lives and feel bad about their own life. And he also talks about how we live as individuals, this radical individualism. And he concludes his comments saying, I think loneliness is a symptom of our failure to care for each other. I would also hazard a guess, and I haven't got any particular research necessarily to back this up, but I think it kind of makes sense that the pace of our modern life in rich Western societies also plays a part. We struggle to prioritize, I think, and see the value as a society in doing the slow work of relationship and community building. Many of us are maxed out And I probably speak for myself in this sometimes. We have hectic schedules. Work life is busy. If we have family, maybe family life is very busy. Maybe we've also bought into the myth that to be busy is to be successful. We always have to have something in our diary. We always have to be telling people how busy we are. That's a mark that we're a successful human. And maybe we're just trying to make the most of everything. We've got our bucket list. We've got our to-do list. We've got our need to be busy. We're cramming in hobbies, leisure activities, exercise, because that's really important, clean eating. We've got maybe multiple friendships with people all over the country, maybe even beyond. All of that is good and wonderful stuff. But unfortunately, it can get in the way. It can crowd out that long, slow, deep work of getting to know people and being known and loved in return. And I think the digital age has only exacerbated this speedy, full throttle lifestyle even more. The amount of information that you can get at a click of your fingertips. The advent of short form videos on social media, which are just conditioning our brain, and research is starting to come out now about how much we're struggling with attention now. How we're just primed for speed over slow, thoughtful reflection. How we're being distracted from the real world in front of us, real world relationships which take time to develop. And many in our society, especially those younger people, maybe some of those lonely young adults who've been brought up on the internet, they're digital natives, they seem to be particularly now craving authenticity. There's so much fakeness online. They're craving authentic relationships over the created lives that they see. And this leads, I think, to a lot of exhaustion, a lot of overcomplicated, overextended lives. Now, I must point out that I don't believe that this is everybody's reality. In fact, probably maybe for some of us in the room, or certainly people we know, the opposite may be true. Some people don't have enough to do in their lives. They don't have enough relationships. Others of us may feel that we're actually doing really well. You know, we're doing fine. Actually, we've got a really great balance in our work life, our family life. Everything else seems to be going well, and that's wonderful. Keep going if that is you. But I don't think that is across the board everybody. And I certainly believe there are many people in our society, many people in our city who are really struggling. And the Church of Jesus and the gospel, that is the story of God's great plan for humanity, has something to say about all of this. And I believe the church is beautifully positioned to offer something radically countercultural, a life-giving alternative, a reality, a better way of living. Because relationships is at the heart of the Bible. It's at the heart of God's story. His relationship with us and our relationship with ourselves and each other. So, for those of us who say we follow Jesus, and maybe not all of us in the room say that we do or are quite sure where we are in relationship with God, and that's absolutely fine. If that's you in the room or listening online, then we're so pleased that you're here. But for those of us that would say that we want to follow Jesus, we want to know him more, we want to become more like him, which is to become a person of love. That is the goal of discipleship to Jesus. Then being in community isn't just a nice idea. It's not an optional add-on to an already maxed out life. I would argue that it is foundational. It is impossible to become more like Jesus without other people, without community. Because God is relational at his core. He is a Trinity. That's kind of this mysterious, wonderful idea that God is three persons in one, not three separate individuals. He is one God, but he has three kind of presentations, three persons: Father, Son, Jesus, and Holy Spirit. And these three persons are in loving relationship with each other at all times. There's some beautiful imagery. I didn't manage to find one here, but of this some artists, and it's in kind of historic Christianity as well, the Trinity being described as almost three people in a dance, holding hands in kind of beautiful symmetry with each other at all times. If you read the Genesis account, like the first book of the Bible, it's there. It talks about God being in different forms, Spirit and Father. And then if you read at the beginning of John's Gospel, he talks about how the Word, that is another word for Jesus, was there right at the beginning of creation as well. And then we see in that Genesis account how we are made in God's image. It's very explicit there, chapter 1, verse 27. God says, I'm going to make human beings, male and female, in my own image. So if God is relational, at the heart of who God is relationship, then we who are made in his image, who are Omega Day, we are to be relational people ourselves. And therefore, it's no surprise that the whole field of interpersonal neuroscience, which has been expanding over about the last 30 years, it shows consistently that human brains develop, only really fully, properly develop, only in the presence of relationships. And not any old relationships, not tons and tons of different people coming in and out of a child's life. It's about a few consistent, caring people, primary caregivers for children. And I think if we're honest as adults, mostly talking to adults in the room, this isn't just true for young children. This is true for us. We crave what it is to be known, to have people who really know us on the insides and still love and accept us. And I believe we also crave to offer that to other people as well. If we want to follow Jesus, we need to be in relationship with each other. And every time that we love another person, we give some of that love away, we become more like Jesus. Whenever we choose to pause before answering back because we've been offended by something that somebody said, whenever we choose patience with someone who's not understanding something that we think is simple to understand, whenever we choose to hold in mind someone, remember them, remember to pray for them, to send them a message, to offer support when life feels like a struggle, we are sharing God's love. We are becoming a little bit more like him. Okay, so you may be asking, okay, well, that's all well and good. Maybe I've convinced you that community and relationships are important to us just as human beings, but also important to us if we want to really follow Jesus, become more like him. But does that mean that I have to do Christian community? Well, I think the answer to that is both a yes and a no. A no, because all people, no matter their belief systems, are in need of loving relationships. And everybody is able to teach us something about becoming more like Jesus. And indeed, those of us who follow Jesus, we are called to intentionally, very deliberately love those who are far away from God. Because they are worth it, because they are also made in God's image. And also because, a bit like those villagers in that Chinese village, when other people who are far from God see something of the love of God in us and the way that we love each other and the way that we love him, they might just be more curious in the God that we know. And it is also absolutely true to say that many people that don't know Jesus personally can be really, really good friends. I have some of them myself. They can be excellently loyal and kind. Sometimes, sadly, we can find better friends outside of the church than we can in the church. However, that all said, there is something about having community with other followers of Jesus that is different. Because in this type of community, we do the stuff that pushes us more towards Jesus. If we're with people that also want to become like Jesus, then we are more likely to become like Jesus. We're also more likely to develop spiritual and other gifts as we practice exercising those in Christian community. And we also get encouraged and empowered by each other to share Jesus with the world around us. Finally, and really importantly, being in community with other people following Jesus is important because Jesus made it clear that that is what we are to do. So Mark chapter 3, verses 32 to 35, Jesus sees his biological family and one of his followers says to him, "There's your mother, there's your brother." And Jesus makes this into a teaching point for those that are listening to him. He says this, he says, "Here are my brothers and my mother. Whoever does God's will is my brother and my sister and my mother." So that could sound really harsh. Could sound like he's kind of almost neglecting or rejecting his biological family. I don't actually think that was what Jesus was doing. I think he was saying, actually, all of those that I'm in relationship with, that we're pushing in the same direction, that we're in Christian community with, that are following me, They are all like my family members. They are like my siblings. They are like my mother and my father. And then in the book of Romans, Romans chapter 8, verses 15 to 17, this is written. I'm going to just find it. The spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received, brought about by your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. The writer here is saying that we have been adopted into God's family. We are now his sons and his daughters, and he is our father. He's our daddy. He's our Abba. So therefore, we are siblings. Maybe look around you for a moment and just take that in. You know, you have brothers and sisters here. These are your family. And it is interesting to note that the most common word used for the church in the New Testament is not the body of Christ or the light on a hill. Those terms aren't used in the New Testament. The most commonly used word for the church is a family. So what does Christian community, what does family in Jesus' sense look like? Well, in order to really, I think, appreciate what that means, we need to know a little bit, don't worry, not too much, but a little bit about what family meant in Jesus' time, in first century Jewish culture, because it doesn't mean what we think of family means now. So probably, I'm guessing, maybe particularly, and that won't be all of us in the room and listening, but certainly for me, if you've grown up in a Western, well, certainly a British society, maybe for all of your life, family tends to mean your nuclear family. So it tends to mean the people that you live with, maybe your biological brothers and sisters, your biological or maybe your adoptive mum or dad. But that is very different from what family meant in first century Jewish life. It meant what sociologists call fictive family groups, or at the time what was known as oikos, which is ancient Greek. It's an ancient Greek word that means household. That's the culture that those first followers of Jesus were growing up in, an ancient Greek culture characterized by this word oikos. It was like the building block of society at the time. Now, what fictive family kinship groups mean, or oikos means, is that these were both nuclear family groups, but they also had extended biological families as part of them, family members, so cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents. Business partners were also part of oikos, as were friends, as were servants in that society. And the early church, for about the first 300 years of its life, formed itself around oikos. It was a house church movement. The majority of gatherings didn't happen in schools like this or in church buildings or anywhere else. They happened in people's homes. They actually happened around the table. There was a level of informality about that. There was always eating because they were gathering around a table. They would pray for each other. They would sing. They would read the scripture together. That was how the early church began, in these extended kind of family groups, these oikos, these households. Yet what was really beautiful in the Jesus version, the New Testament, the early church version of oikos, is that they were the most radically loving and inclusive version of that. Because it was both men and women who were at the table together. It was both free person and slave who were at the table together. It was both Jew, Gentile, and those from other nations who sat at the table together, because all were equal in God's sight and therefore in each other's sight. Now we live now, I'm sure you don't need me to remind you, in a vastly different culture from that. But I still think that something of that spirit of oikos can be possible in today's society and in the modern church. So we're just going to dig a little bit into that. And then in the next kind of 3 Sundays, we're going to explore, look at different themes of that on the different Sundays, more about what that actually looks like and what that might mean for us here in Oxford today. So In a moment, you're going to see some circles. And this, unfortunately, I forgot to write who the author of this was, but it's a man called Dr. Robin Dunbar. You can look him up online, or if you want to read a book, I'm sure you can read a book about his work. And it's called Dunbar's Number. So this is probably one of the most widely accepted ways of showing how as human beings we function in relationships. The number bit will become a bit clearer in a moment. But Dr. Robin Dunbar, who actually at the time, I'm not sure if he still is, but he was a professor here in Oxford at the university. In the 1990s, he was doing research. He was using data from the size of primates' brains, as well as then humans' brains, calculating the certain number of relationships that human beings can have at different levels of intimacy. So essentially, the more you go out in the layers, the less close relationships you can have. And that's related to the amount of time that you need to spend with those people in order for those relationships to be close. So at the center of Dunbar's number, this diagram, there are the intimates. These are between 1 and 5 people, 5 max. So that might include a spouse, a partner, best friend, kind of close family members. Then the next layer out is like your super family, your kinship group. Maybe that's your oikos in New Testament, kind of in the New Testament world. So those are family and friends, people that you do life with. Maybe people that you share meals with relatively regularly. Maybe people you go on holiday with. You help each other out practically. You serve each other. You help each other discern things in life and make wise decisions. You may call each other out in love when you realize that maybe somebody's doing something that's taking them away from Jesus. Then the next kind of circle out is your, had to bang the mic. The next circle out is your clan. And this is called the law of 150. So basically you can only have max 150 people in your clan. Now these are close acquaintances. Clan. Yes, you're right. Clan is 50. I've moved on to tribe, sorry. I've written it wrong in my notes. Clan is about 50 people. So this is your close acquaintances. This is a bit like your kind of village. And cognitively speaking, Dunbar says that's why you can only have about 50 people there, because you just haven't got enough brain space to keep in mind more than about 50 people on a regular basis. It also is about the time that you literally have in your days, in the hours that you're awake each day, to invest meaningfully in relationships. You can only do that with about 50 people. And then the other one, as Josh has helpfully pointed out, is your tribe. That's a maximum of about 150 people that you can know a bit more than, you will recognize their face, you'll know who they are, you will know a little bit about their life, but you're not going to know them really, really well. And it's interesting if you read the New Testament that Jesus had relationships in all 4 of these circles. So he had at least 3 intimates. So we read about them in the New Testament: James, Peter, and John, like his closest disciples. These were the people that he took to the Garden of Gethsemane just before he died. Then he had 12 others, and probably more if you included women like Mary and Martha as well. His kind of 12 disciples and a few others. Those were like his kind of super family, his oikos, his household. Then we read about 120 followers of his in Jerusalem. That's like his clan. And then there was a tribe, an even larger group of people, a movement of people who followed him, many of whom he would have known a little bit. So what might all of this kind of mean for us in this church, in this city, in this day? Well, one of the benefits of being part of a smaller church is that it's less hard to get lost in a crowd, certainly on a Sunday, which can be a really, really positive thing. However, I would add that it is still perfectly possible to come irregularly on a Sunday, or maybe even regularly on a Sunday, and still not really feel known, still experience loneliness. Because actually as a group we are more than that kind of 15 to 20 oikos kind of number. And also because on a Sunday, like most churches, we don't kind of do the table church like they did in the early church in quite the same way anymore. Therefore, one thing I would suggest that we need to all think carefully about is ensuring that we do have enough intimates and kin or super family, because even in a church like this, we could get lost and not be known and not know others. We'll come back to thinking about some of the ways that we do that here at Hope in kind of future talks, but certainly one of the ways that we encourage people to be known, to develop certainly that kind of oikos type experience is in our life groups. So these are the midweek groups that Josh mentioned earlier. They're smaller than they are on a Sunday. They are around a table in people's homes, and they really are about just being ourselves, about bringing who we really are. There isn't so much kind of content. There's not like a talk in the same way. It's about discussion. It's about sharing our lives with each other. It's about thinking about the Bible in depth together. And also something that we're just beginning to start here at Hope that I think Josh is going to speak a bit more about next Sunday is something that we're calling formational pods, or pods for short. And these are going to be kind of groups of maybe 3 people of the same gender that will meet maybe monthly. And so that will be a bit more of kind of like that intimate experience, who will dig even deeper into what God is doing in my own life and in the other people's lives in my little pod. And they will be asking each other some kind of intentional questions on a regular basis to really help each other think about, what does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to become a person of love? But yeah, more on that next time. So as I come to an end, kind of opening up this series on community, I just wanted to mention a few things, because I know, because I experience these myself, that there are barriers and obstacles that get in the way of us living this way. It all sounds lovely. It all sounds like the answer to things, both how we're wired as humans, but how we are to live as followers of Jesus, and it's how Jesus and the early church did things. But it's just not always that simple and that easy to put into practice. Some of these barriers will be explored a bit more in future talks in this series. But I wanted to acknowledge that sometimes, or maybe often actually, certainly within myself, there can be almost like a pull and a push factor towards community. I get pulled towards it. I think it's the most wonderful thing ever, and sometimes it gives me the greatest of joy. And then at other times I kind of want to retreat away. I get pulled away because it's difficult. You know, some of those barriers are very practical. I remember when me and Josh first got married, Josh was a full-time physiotherapist. He was also a semi-professional rugby player. He trained 4 nights a week. He played all over the country every Sunday. Like, kind of being in church community was really hard for him at that time. Others of you, it might be, your work schedule, or it might be health issues, or it might be caring responsibilities, or transport issues, or maybe a whole nother kind of other things as well that get in the way, that make it practically hard to be in close community with other people in the church. Another barrier is also that it's just hard work. It sounds lovely and fluffy, but in practice, developing relationship, particularly those kind of intimate and those super family relationships, it takes time. Sometimes it's pretty boring. It can be quite tiring. Other people can be really annoying. I'm sure I'm probably rather annoying as well myself. There are always going to be misunderstandings and potential for conflict in relationships. We may be afraid that if we really show who we are, whether anyone else will actually like us or want to get close to us. We risk getting hurt when we enter into relationships with other people. And it's fair to say for some people, relationships in particular are very difficult. They have been a source of tremendous pain and suffering, yet at the same time being the same thing that those people need for healing. For people that may have experienced early relational trauma or other relational trauma later on in their lives, it can be particularly hard to trust other people and to enter into reciprocal relationships. Jesus-like community always involves a risk. It always involves something of us. There is always an element of sacrifice, whether it's our time, whether it's having to bite our tongue sometimes, whether it's just having to do, like I said, that kind of slow, not always glamorous work of developing relationships. It's not always easy, but it is always the Jesus way. What alternative do we have? As Eugene Peterson puts it, he wrote the Message version of the Bible, and he wrote a book with this title. Following Jesus is a long obedience in the same direction. It often doesn't look much when we're in the middle of it. It's often just putting one foot slowly in front of the other. But when we look back over the years, we see where we've come. We see how much our lives have been changed, how we've been formed in our minds, our hearts, our personalities, our bodies into becoming more of people of love. That's when we realize that it was worth it. So, a couple of kind of things that you might want to go away and think about over this week. Maybe it's time to consider Dunbar's circles, Dunbar's number. Really think, do I have people in those different circles? Do I have enough intimates? Do I have enough kind of super family that's around about 15 to 20 people max? I would suggest it's often those two categories that people don't have enough people in. Or maybe it's some you don't quite feel you're lacking in the outer groups as well. Just think about that. Pray about that. Ask the Lord what he might have you do about that. Maybe if you're not plugged into a life group here at church, think about that. Pray about that. If there's a particular practical issue or another issue that's getting in the way of you being able to access that, come and talk to me or Josh or somebody else on the team here. We would love to try and make that possible for you. Like I said, there'll be these formational pods that we'll be speaking more on soon. That might be something that you really want to consider. And I just want to finish with some words for a song I know I've known about for a while, but I was really kind of meditating on the words of this song on Friday, and there was a particular line that really, really struck me. And there's an image, I think, Jordan, if you can put it up, that goes with this song. It's a song called Hope on the Horizon. It's by Rich and Lydia DeCass. It's a beautiful song. And it's a song about continuing to trust in God, to give him our worship, even when prayers remain unanswered. And the lyrics for the bridge of the song go like this. Oh, come, gather your strength, open your heart, give him your hallelujah, and trust him. Trust him again, deep in the night. Pour out your hallelujah and know that you're not alone. You run with the saints, singing out hallelujah to God, God on the throne. He is our hope, worthy of highest praises. This song is talking about how almost counterintuitively we are to press more into God, to give him our worship even when we don't necessarily feel that we want to, even when it feels like our prayers haven't been answered, when life feels really difficult. But there is a beautiful promise, not only that he will meet us when we do that, but that we are not alone, that we run with the saints. Saints just means, it doesn't mean especially holy people that are now dead. It just means fellow followers of Jesus. We have each other to run with. We have each other to walk alongside when we can't run. We have each other even to hobble beside us and with each other when we can't even walk. Sometimes we have other people that actually need to carry us, or we need to help carry other people. Because we have been designed for each other. It's hardwired into our brains and into our bodies. We belong to each other, as Mother Teresa said. And it is the way of Jesus. So we're just going to have some time just to pray, just to be quiet. I'd encourage you just to maybe close your eyes if you find that helpful. Just, for me anyway, it's just a way of kind of crowding out distraction, other people, other stuff we're looking at, tempted to engage with, tempted to think about, and just kind of giving God our all.